Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I am Anara Tabashaliva, along with co-host Dr. Victor Fett, Dr. Katerina Shrey, and our program producer, Professor Larry Sherey. We host a weekly discussion panel on Russia's war on Ukraine with guests from Ukraine, military experts, medical personnel, academics, artists, literary figures, and relief workers. Our panel is recorded and circulated nationally and internationally. We appreciate your comments and feedback. Special thanks to Marshall University Libraries and MUIT for making this weekly event possible. If you're joining us live on Teams, please feel free to use the chat to post questions for our guest. A quick greetings to our viewers in Ukraine from Dr. Katerina Shrey.
Вітаємо наших слухачів в Україні з глибоким поклоном. Ми далі свідки вашого страшного терпіння і також вашої великої сили. Дякую вам за вашу участь в нашій тижневій програмі.
Thank you. Today's guest will be introduced by Dr. Victor Fett.
Thank you, Anara. It is my pleasure and honor today to introduce Gary Light, a Chicago-based American poet and attorney. Gary was born in Kyiv in 1967 and lives in the USA since 1980. He has graduated from Northwestern University in Slavic literature and political studies, and then became a lawyer in the area of international law. His poetry was widely published in USA, Canada, Israel, Europe, and Ukraine. And Gary's most recent trilingual book of poetry in Ukrainian, Russian, and English, Doloroso, was recently published in his native Kyiv. I yield microphone to Gary Light, and please tell us more about yourself, about what you are doing, and your origins, whatever you care to tell us today. Thank you, Gary.
Well, thank you so much for the kind invitation. It's an honor to be here. I follow this program. There were some fascinating guests that you had, and I'm honored and humbled to finally become one of those guests. Indeed, I was born in Ukraine, so I am from Ukraine. My family is Jewish and has been living in Ukraine for many years, as far as I could tell. In 1941, the reason our family has gone on and did not perish is both of my parents were taken by their parents on the next to last trains out of Kyiv before it was occupied by the Nazis. And unfortunately, about 2/3 of our family perished in Babi Yar. Babi Yar is a place of pilgrimage to me, the same way as Yad Vashem is. Whenever I come to Kyiv, this is one of the first places I go. And I'm very lucky and fortunate to have very talented and good friends in Kyiv who share my sentiments and my pain of history. I sincerely believe that what we are is our history. And if somebody famous, I will not quote the name right now because it's might be a little redundant, but somebody famous said that if we don't know our past, we will not have our future. It became vividly obvious on the February day of 24th of February 2022, when suddenly a runaway gas station of huge proportions decided that it will redraw European boundaries, which were the result of a very bloody war that lasted from 1939 to 1945, and a lot of lives perished. We were also reminded of bad lessons from history just recently on October 7th, which started another calamity in the Middle East. And as a Jewish person, I have to admit that that was a very rude wake-up call for me. No lessons were learned, and Holocaust is not over. I'm a lawyer, so I have to be a little careful as to what I say. But I'm also a poet. So in that capacity, I can say a lot. So my question to Dr. Fat, how does he want to take this conversation further? Do you want to have a little dialogue, or do you want me to read some poetry? Your microphone is off.
I can say that me and other moderators on this program usually give some cues to our speakers to start unraveling what one may call identity of complexity or complexity of identity. So, Dr. Shrey, please.
I love what you just said about language. As an attorney, your words are measured and careful, but you can say a lot as a poet. I just love that, and I'm responding to that, and like what power both of those capacities, poet, lawyer, lots of power. It's a very different kind of power. I just love that. When you mentioned that you visit Babyn Yar as almost like a pilgrimage when you go back to Ukraine, I think that is profoundly moving and especially relevant in light of the tragedy of October 7th, which we're still kind of getting our heads around how this could happen again. And so I would love for you, like when you go to Babyn Yar, what for those of us who have not been there, who have not, what is it does do you get the sense that it is valued by Ukrainians? Is it kept up? Is it like what? Tell us about that. We have memorials and monuments here in the United States, which we approach with great reverence and respect. Tell us a little bit about how Babyn Yar is situated there in Ukraine. How is it treated?
Of course. Well, first of all, let's go a little back as to the history of Babyn Yar. There were a lot of кілька слів українською. Дякую вам щиро за те, що ви казали, щоб в Україні нас розуміли. Дякую вам. Thank you so much for greeting the audience in Ukrainian. That means a lot to me. So a little sort of a preface to that. Kyiv is a very cosmopolitan city. It has always spoken many languages. As a good friend of mine, which Marina and Victor know very well, Alexei Nikitin, who just wrote an amazing novel about the whole issue of Holocaust in Ukraine. It's called, and it will be published in English in Harvard, in Boston, very soon. In a amazing translation of Catherine Anu, who is also a friend of ours. So Kyiv was always a cosmopolitan city. There was an amazing Polish culture there, an amazing Ukrainian culture, a very vital and a vibrant Jewish culture. I mean, Shalom Aleichem is from Kyiv. But not to diminish Russian culture in any way. I'm not about diminishing cultures. But when one culture tries to dominate, it eventually becomes a political nightmare. And there were really amazing Russian poets and Russian composers, and Kyiv never claimed to be a foreign place to any culture, including Russian. But to come back to your question of Babyn Yar, it's a huge tragedy of the Holocaust, and everybody knows that. But the Soviet propaganda after it happened did so much in order for that to be forgotten. In fact, they probably tried as much as the Nazis did in order for that crime not to be known. Babyn Yar, and again, I would like to qualify that, it was not Ukrainians. Ukraine was occupied at the moment. Every nation during World War II had collaborators. Ukraine was not an exception, but they were very much in minority. There are thousands of Ukrainians who helped Jews, who saved Jewish children. So that label of collaborators, which the Soviet propaganda placed on Ukrainians, and yet another crime. Babyn Yar, they decided to make it a stadium. In the 1940s and 1950s, they wanted to erase the memory of it and make it a park and a stadium. But karma is not something to be joking with. So there were waters that were gathering there, and unfortunately, a huge deluge in 1961. They were trying to build a dam there, and as everything in the Soviet Union, it was done in a very dumb way. So there was a deluge of dirt and water that came out of Babi Yar, reminding them that this is a place not to be joking with. And thousands of people died. So Babi Yar knows how to pay back. In 1975, when I was a kid growing up in Kyiv, I was living by Babin Yar. And my father, trying to sort of, I don't know, he had some mercy on me, I guess. How do you explain to a 7-year-old that you weren't supposed to be born, really? I mean, if your grandmas didn't jump on that train, you wouldn't be. So he told me that there are ravines here and people died in them, and that he will tell me the story later. And we were passing by this big rock, and it said a lot of Soviet people were killed here by the Nazis. No mention of Jews at all. And then there will be a monument built. So they built a monument probably 2 years before we left Kyiv to immigrate. The monument is in this grandiose Soviet style. It has grand Russian soldiers defending women and children, and of course, a beautiful woman, obviously with Russian traits in her face. So no mention of Ukrainians, no mention of Jews, just that sort of kettle of Soviet people. And we all knew that that monument was erected not at the place where the murders were happening. The murders are the killing fields, so to speak. Unfortunately, that term is now used for genocide everywhere after what happened in Cambodia. So the killing fields were a little bit further, and they're in the ravines, and those ravines still exist. And that's where Jewish organizations from the United States built a menorah. And that's a different sort of a monument, which we always go to. So the Soviet attempt to make Babin Yar not exist did not happen. Ukraine takes care of it. Ukraine remembers it. Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you. That's the menorah.
That's beautiful. Yeah.
And where the trees are, just a little bit to the right, that's where those awful, terrible ravines are, and they still are there.
And to see
So after Ukraine became independent, Babin Yar became that place of pilgrimage. And a lot of my Ukrainian friends are telling me things that I did not know, because I left when I was 12 years old. I keep coming back and keep learning from my Ukrainian friends. When the war started in February of 2022, one of the first missiles hit Babin Yar. So the Russians are not done with it yet. Their excuse was, well, there is a TV tower there. They knew exactly what they were doing. And they're knowing exactly what they're doing right now by hosting Hamas. The Soviet Union might be gone, but the walking corpse of Russian Federation is still a walking dead. So we're going to have to sort of live with it up until the world comes together and understands that until Russia, Iran, and the North Korea are dealt with, there will not be peace in the world. They woke up and they will do what they want to do. And again, I hope I did not go on for too long answering your question on Babin Yar.
No, I think I think when Victor pointed out the complexity of identity, you are living in America, you speak at least 3 languages, and you left Ukraine as a child, and so I understand this. I'm Ukrainian American. I was born here, and I was raised in Philadelphia, and in the northern cities, Chicago among them, there are large populations of Ukrainians. So my school, my place of worship, stores we went to, dance lessons, panel, everything was in Ukrainian. And then I remember visiting Ukraine for the first time as a young adult, and it was overwhelming, because I'd always been Ukrainian American. Well, all of a sudden here, that American shell goes away. I always knew how to be a Ukrainian. I was always Ukrainian, but it's always in the context of being part of an immigrant conclave, which was for me a beautiful life. We had two cultures. I feel bad for kids who didn't have more than one culture, and so the idea that you honor and I'm tearing up here, so I'm going to kind of cut this short, but I think it is very beautiful, profound, and fitting that you honor the suffering of your people when you go back. I see that Dean Deutsch has a question. Lenny Deutsch was the former dean of the Graduate College at Marshall University. He's a very good friend of our program and a strong supporter of many of people from Ukraine who are making their way to the West. So Dean Deutsch, the microphone is yours.
Please.
My question is, prior to the Russian invasion, did you consider yourself a Ukrainian American poet? Do you consider yourself since then a Ukrainian American poet? And how has your poetry been affected by events of the past couple of years?
Thank you so much for your question. The question of identity. There is the famous Kyiv-born writer who wrote in Russian, Mikhailo Bulgakov. He's in the news again because there is a film of his most famous novel, The Master and Margarita, that came out last week, and it's causing a huge uproar in all of the Russian-speaking world. The reason I mention it is because there is one of the few famous lines in that novel which say, the question of the blood origin is the most complex question of them all. It's basically the source of all the beautiful, and a lot of evil. Do I consider myself an American Ukrainian poet? If I have the right, I will. Some people would say that my Ukrainian is a bit rusty still, even though I'm working on it. So once I master it, maybe then I will earn the title of being called an American Ukrainian poet. But Leonard Cohen, and I'm sitting in Manhattan right now, not far from the famous Chelsea Hotel, where Leonard Cohen and the whole culture of the 60s and the 70s thrived. For me, Leonard Cohen is a teacher and just an epitome of a poet. He was a Canadian who lived on a Greek island, loved Manhattan, and wrote in English. So those labels are kind of fleeting in a way. I consider myself an American first and foremost, because this country has given me an opportunity to be a free person. I'm a little worried about certain processes that have been taking place in this most amazing country in the world since 2016, but we will not go into that because that's when the lawyer in me says, stop. As far as the poetry is concerned, ironically, I started writing it in Russian. And most of my publications up until, I would say, 2008 were in Russian. Some in English, but were in Russian. As a lawyer, I've worked in an American and English legal firms in Moscow since 1996 for a couple of years. That's when that country decided that it might want to join the civilized world. Well, that experiment didn't really work. But I was fortunate enough to meet a lot of literary and theater figures at that time in Moscow. So I was culturally very much into Russian culture. Since about 2008, since the Russian invasion of Georgia, I stopped any and all publications in Russia proper. I was a member of the Moscow Writers Union, recommended to get there by very good friends and very distinguished poets. I stopped any and all contacts with that. Since the invasion of Georgia in 2008, things have become very obvious to me. Therefore, I pretty much moved to English. And even though I continue to write in Russian, I don't think the language is to be blamed. I also don't think the language is to be seized to a group of criminals. Languages do not belong to people. Languages belong to societies, including the world society. And thank you very much in advance. I'm talking to the dean and his question for mentioning my poetry. It hasn't sounded yet. Once it does sound, you might not find it very interesting. So to rephrase, I am an American who was born in Kyiv, and I consider being a Kyivite as a nationality. And Kyiv just happens to be capital city of the most amazing country that I was honored to be born in, Ukraine. Whether I'm a Ukrainian poet or not, it's up to Ukrainians to decide. I'm a poet. I write the way I can write.
Fascinating.
Thank you, Gary. This is very well said, very thoughtful and very beautiful. Let us hear some, if you don't mind.
Since thank you so much. Since I'm in Manhattan, I would like to share a poem about Leonard Cohen, because he is so much an epitome of Manhattan and Montreal and Hydra in Greece and just this whole global poetry. And that will probably be the only poem of mine that I will read today. It's from the book Confluences, which came out in 2020. And there were a lot of presentations planned and throughout the United States, in California, in Canada, in England, and they were all about to start in March of 2020. We all know what happened in March in 2020, but that's when we discovered Zoom. So that book was mostly, it's selling pretty okay on the Amazon, I would say, but it was mostly presented on Zoom, pretty much globally. I'm proud of that. So the poem that I wanted to read from that, it's called What I imagined what it was that Leonard Cohen saw from his window in the Chelsea Hotel in the late 60s and early 70s. Those who know those times and the art of Leonard Cohen, that's when he famously ran into Janis Joplin in the elevator. So Leonard Cohen once wrote, "Those were the reasons," and that was New York. And that's Manhattan over that window over there. I was walking in Central Park yesterday before our poetry reading here in the evening in Joseph Brodsky's famous favorite place. Very honored to have been a part of it. So like I said, in the beginning of this poem, I'm quoting Leonard Cohen, who wrote famously, "Those were the reasons, and that was New York." What Leonard Cohen had seen of the outside, an island view, not Hydra, yet sufficing. For those impressions which curtail sadness, fire escapes, their complaints intertwining across the street, there was a laundromat, as well as a delightful Cantonese joint, a little awkward yet delicious and fulfilling. He also saw an entrance to a shrine, yet not the store full of guitars and other gear. As Janice blocked the view while she wished for another kind of joy completely different, all the while it appeared to her that she descended to him and not the other way around. Over just beyond the window, he contemplated such arrays of magic which rarely appear when in confluence, even with such discrete circumstances, they can't be sung or written down just that moment. Yet Leonard Cohen, from his window, saw it all. Manhattan sky of such amazing kind that later on he wouldn't comprehend it. He also wouldn't know how the hell the buildings and the sirens simply vanished. All indications were the world as such apparently was ending. Yet the weather folks provided explanations, less drastic for New Yorkers to consider. Then he remembered his beloved Montreal, where certain happenings were also quite frequent, especially in those interpretations that were Suzanne's, as when she goes down abruptly to the river in November, it's cold and windy, in accordance to the text. What Leonard Cohen saw from that hotel on 23rd and 7th through the window belongs to no one, yet to everyone, while contemplations still remain within a choice. What Leonard Cohen saw appeared spellbound, quite impossible in diametric vision. Burned by the sun, the future of Key West, where he is being tried in Russian versions. Ironically, the best attempt belongs to an enigma of the past, so full of doubts. As to her talent and her beauty even more, her role had ended. Yet coming off her protracted absence, she suddenly appeared some years later in a brief encounter, by very random chance, on an intersection of that island, which belonged to Leonard Cohen's view from Chelsea in the 60s. Back then, he somehow managed to foresee the future in the way of certain sketches, made out of music, sounds, and some words, which are enlightened by the volume of his kind. They balance out those under the moon, which contradict the harmony of light. And therefore, that window at the Chelsea forever will belong to Leonard Cohen, who saw it all. That night of love was Janus. His wisdom's in the morrow is tomorrow, not today. Sorry, it was a bit of a longer poem, but there's a lot in it.
Bravo, bravo.
Bravo,
Thank
it's
you.
beautiful. And again, we hear it in English now, which again brings us to the ideas of intercultural intercomplexity. We talked about Russian and Ukrainian and English. Dr. Shrey, please, you had a comment?
I just put the link to the book in Amazon in the chat. And I know that in the foreword to the book, it mentions that some of your poetry has been turned into music in the Kyiv area. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Of course. Thank you for the question. It just happened so. I was always fascinated, especially in the beginning, and as they call formative years, by the singing poets. And of course, those friends of ours who are here, when I mentioned the name of Vysotsky or Galich or Kudjava, those are the people that, no matter what happens, you know, Russia cannot claim them. Those are the people that basically saved my Russian language. There's a lot of people who came here at my age or a little earlier age or a little later age, and they lost the language. And then there's no blame for it. I mean, when you come to America, and it's such a tremendous melting pot that, you know, you embrace English and you just go on. Those three singers, singing poets, they're poets first and foremost. They saved my Russian. So I contemplated to learn guitar and failed miserably because certain things are not to be, you know. But I was lucky enough to have very talented friends who heard my lines, which eventually they classified as poetry. I, by the way, never call myself poet in Russian, and Victor and Marina know that. Some of my very good friends here in Manhattan call it false modesty. But I sincerely believe that that poet is a title. It's a title that's bestowed by people from the outside.
Nice.
When one calls himself poet, that's, in my mind, it's kind of, I don't know. However, I will learn to do that because people tell me that I've already earned the title. But I never learned to play guitar. So these amazing friends of mine, they recorded a whole CD, and they keep doing it. And it's a huge honor for me. Whenever we have poetry readings of mine, usually we sort of interject it with the songs. And I'm just a no. I know sometimes I look and I listen. I'm like, did I write that? Really? I mean, it sounds so much better in the song. So yeah, that's true. I see that we're coming up and almost half of our time has elapsed. What I want to do, and it's important for me, but you guys are running the show, so you tell me how you want to do this. I would like to introduce you to some friends of mine's poetry in my translations. Um, Believe me, I've been translating poetry for many, many years. I've been translating Leonard Cohen. And by the way, I have to mention that as far as translating Leonard Cohen is concerned, Marina and I have a friend in Ottawa in Canada. His name is Michael Rickoff. His translations of Leonard Cohen are absolutely masterful. And there are a lot of good poets who are translating Cohen. I've been doing it for, I don't know, not half, but quarter of a century for sure. I'm okay, but Misha Rickoff mastered the art. So Marina and I probably will be joining Misha in Ottawa in March. He will have a sort of a big presentation. By the way, Victor, just an idea for you. I'm going to throw this out. Invite Misha. Invite him to talk to you about his Canadian experience and translating beautiful poetry of pretty amazing kind. I don't know,
Yes,
just
yeah.
a thought.
Thank you.
But I like the reason I started talking about translations. It's an art. It's a very complicated and complex art, and originals are always better. I mean, we can say a lot about a lot and put a lot of time into it. You cannot beat the original. In a translation, the most you can hope for is not to soil it. So I would like to start with something a bit tragic. This is the book of Maxim Krivtsov. Maxim Krivtsov is a Ukrainian soldier, an artist, and an amazing poet. He turned 33 years old on January 22nd. Unfortunately, he could not celebrate that because on January 7th, he was murdered by the Russian missile on the front lines. The book came out about 3 weeks before that, the first printing of it. Now the Ukrainian pen club embraced him, and there will be a lot of his poetry coming out, in translation including. So with your permission, I would like to introduce at least one poem of his in my translation, which I claim no copyright to, because I couldn't get a chance to get in touch with, before our meeting today, I tried to get in touch with his publishers and ask them for permission to read this translation. But as a disclaimer, I'm not claiming a copyright here. So if they want to have it, they can.
Mr. Light, before you read, can you please say the poet's name again, one more time?
Of course. His name is Maxim Krivtsov. And let me spell the last name.
Please do.
And please, I'm no Mr. Light. I'm Gary today. Please.
Thank you, Gary.
So it's Kryvtsov. And in Ukrainian, it's Kryvtsov. The name might sound Russian. He's, I mean, an epitome of a Ukrainian poet and an epitome of the new generation of Ukrainians. And that's, before I read his poem, that's another observation I would like to make. There is this generation that came up right after independence and just who were born maybe a few years before. They are prodigies. these people, whenever I talk to them or have an honor to read poetry with them, they are the freest generation possible. They're more American than most radically free Americans. They are as Canadian or as European as you can imagine. They are multilingual. They're very smart, and they're incredibly talented. But first and foremost, they are Ukrainian. They're the hope of Ukraine.
Yeah.
They do not know how to be slaves. It's not in their DNA. It's not. It's that thing is absent from there. And sadly enough, that generation is being murdered on the front lines every day in thousands. And if we have any Russian patriots that would suddenly come upon this broadcast, I would like to say, shame on you. Shame on you, you Russian murderers. Shame on you for killing that Ukrainian generation. So a little bit on Maxim. First birthday without him was on January 22nd. There are events commemorating his life, his art, and his poetry that took place in Kyiv and Lviv. I'm certain that throughout the world, there are many of us who have embraced his honest and painful poetry, who are translating this poetry into a variety of global languages, mostly in order to treat this gaping void of his being murdered by a Russian missile just about a month ago. We translate his poetry out of the simple fact that not translating his poetry is not an option. I'm extremely grateful to a friend of mine, prominent Ukrainian filmmaker Oleg Chorny, for introducing me to Maxim Krivtsov's poetry more than a year ago. Once another great poet who was born in Ukraine, wrote in Russian, who was also born on January 22nd, just like Maxim was, and his name is Yuri Levitansky. So he was forever wounded by another great war of the different time, that World War II. And Yuri Levitansky wrote, "We each choose for ourselves a woman to be with, a religion, a path to follow. We also each choose which poetry hits closest to the heart." Maxim's poem about his frontline body, an enormous orange cat, is an ode to a great friend, albeit a feline, who never left his side and died along with Maxim in that Russian missile strike a month ago. No comparison of circumstances by any means, but about a year and a half ago, due to the courage and selflessness of a group of Kyiv's animal rescue volunteers, another enormous Ukrainian orange cat, who was wounded but did not perish, was saved from danger, healed, and taken to safety in Poland, from which a couple of American volunteers, with the help of my Warsaw-based musical co-author, brought him to Philadelphia, where I met their plane. This cat has been living in our Northside Chicago home ever since and became a great friend of mine and even a co-author, albeit a feline. I translated a few of Maxim's poems by now, which is a privilege and an honor. But this one, about an enormous orange cat, where on the frozen front lines of Ukraine, which is bleeding and loses its best and brightest on behalf of whatever is deemed to be Western civilization. Ukraine is fighting for the Western civilization not to perish. So this poem of Maxim's really hit close to heart. And while no translation could do true justice to Maxim Krivtsov's integral poetic lyricism, it's the least some of us could do this winter and beyond. So the Ukrainian line, which I will quote here, is this, and some of us will understand it. Хочу розповісти вам історію про рудого велетенського кота. Maxim Krivtsov. I want to tell you a story of an enormous orange cat, the color of which is akin to the dried up mowed corn of August. The cat has just the white breastplate, the sad green as if green oil eyes. This cat often squints his eyebrows, as if in the process of studying science of labor. A sun does not happen here really, which have you seen the sun last once upon in the beginning of autumn. This cat was a real threat for all the local mice in the trenches. Hey, this dugout is the property of an enormous orange cat. Run, avoid at all costs running into him. Run by your swiftest, the mice would say to each other, and whispered to themselves. Once, this orange cat attempted to capture a mouse in this lazy yet phenomenal leap in the trenches, flying over a burner with an open blue flame supplied by the United States, which resulted in now burned, untidy, comically curled, not unlike the famous painter's subsequently not such long whiskers, to remind the cat of that legendary leap. He carefully positions on the edge of the shelf to sleep by the entrance to the trenches, draped with 2 layers of blankets supplied by Canada. The cat then studies something with a stare through small slits, perhaps someone's a friend or an enemy, a fox or a person. This cat knows each single path, each strange shack into a dugout. And Norman's orange cat has just one secret. When from the outside there are sounds, this terribly loud and menacing uproar of an incoming missile, and the earth trembles, that's the ancient giants are waking up. Going about their business, the cat immediately jumps into a hole in the paneling of a trench and is hiding somewhere in this catacomb depth of the tiny dugout. The cat would not peek out. Why would he? Up until the giants and their missiles have their feet tired of walking. When the cat finally falls asleep, he lazily extends his front paws. The orange cat dreams of summer and peace, dreams of that brick house still being whole, not destroyed by the Russian missiles, dreams of chicken running around the yard, dreams of children who are treating him to meat pieces. My helmet accidentally falls out of my hands, falls into the mud. The cat wakes up, squints his eyes, carefully assesses the surroundings, no enemies around, and falls asleep again. Unfortunately, that enormous orange cat, the best buddy of Maxim's, was murdered with him that day, on January 7th. So I urge you to look up Maxim's poetry. It's becoming more and more evident on the internet right now. There will be a lot of happenings going on, and he was just 33 years old. I see that we have about 15 minutes left, and I soon have to head to LaGuardia to get home to Chicago, where the amazing Ukrainian community is. You are absolutely right, Katerina. But what I would like to do is, Victor and Marina and I, we have this, sometimes we gather, it's called, what, Victor, may I mention our ocean bridge?
Yes, I just wanted to ask you to tell us a little bit about Ocean Bridge.
Okay, so the Ocean Bridge, as turns out, there is a science fiction novel of that name, which we didn't know when Oleg Maximenko and myself came up with the idea during COVID to start gathering people together to talk about poetry and literature and whatever other things we talk about. But apparently there is an amazing science fiction writer. There's a duo of them, and they are known in the internet as Oldie. And they have this novel called The Ocean Bridge, which we did not know about. Now we've found out about it. I met them in Kyiv, and hopefully we'll have them on one of our broadcasts soon. But the idea was, again, that, COVID, People are sitting in their apartments and don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, and share poetry. COVID is done was hopefully. The war started, and then another one. And that's how we go to Ukraine and to Israel and to Paris and to New York and to Canada. And we have friends and authors from all over the world now. So on the Ocean Bridge, people read in many languages. Our language of conversation is Russian because it seems to be that imperial language that a lot of people, due to historical circumstances, speak. But with your permission, I would like to introduce you to some of the authors that we had there in my English translation. Of course, we had Victor reading there. We had a couple of times, actually. We had Marina there and some other people who come there. What I wanted to start was, Victor, with your permission, I would like to read a poem of somebody who became a good friend of yours and has been a good friend of mine. And that is, you know who I'm talking about, right? Grigory Falkovich.
Yep.
I'm going to read one of his lyrical poems, with your permission. Тебя, любовь, я не благодарю, is the epigraph from Grigory Falkovich. I offer you no gratitude, my love. As for sunrise, no gratitude is due. When it transcends through the branches and the stones shining on life, which so begins anew. No words I utter. Silently we do embrace September, thankfully for things, such as the forest simply gaining wings, and for the summer, which is now through. And one more. One more for Grigory Falkovich, who I had the privilege of reading poetry with in the most amazing city on this planet, Kyiv, Ukraine. Perhaps it always seems, especially in summer, so solid yet not strong, the surface of the earth, we get no more than life when sun rays are abound, and yet no less than death awaits in sunset's loss. Could be not once or twice we walked along the edges, blue echoes of the dusk, and ashes which was grass. The trials of the soul, persistent, thirsty pledges, where much was sadly said at junction soundless. The day is marked as lived, fatigue and evening's image takes over in its right and won't budge an inch. Yet here a nurse remains, that everlasting scrimmage that is no less than life, no more than death in clinch. Grigory Falkovich.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you.
I also would like to read a poem by Oleg Maximenko, a great friend of mine. And then if we have time left, I would like to read at least one poem of Pavel Ritzer, who is also on front lines right now. He's a Ukrainian soldier and one of the most amazing poets that we know. Oleg Maximenko. If I won't come back with my silly backpack, where that poetry notebook does smell of tobacco, where a hole from that bullet still lingers, don't be smirking while snapping your fingers and then saying that poet is unknown Vacco. And the poems themselves are mere wingers, while it's true that we hardly officially met. Leaves have changed but just once, never mind, but yet I remember that waltz, long and magic, with your lips being narrow, untouchingly tragic, and your glance as warm cinnamon led me to bed. I was so unsure and stayed quiet, so awkward, pelagic. Unrequited love is with me since that day. In my poems as outlaw, I often say, in that notebook of wandering kind, I am ready to run, to unwind. The escaped brown eyes, being cruel as they may, playing Russian roulette, deathly quiet. Universal eternity passes perhaps on a corner where alien nebulous walls, as if milk disappears, prayers stumble. In a samsaric circle, humbly, I'll turn up at your feet as a wandering cat. You would not recognize me and wonder. So Pavel Rit, that was Oleg Maximenko, a great friend of mine with whom we co-founded the Ocean Bridge, and very good poet. And Marina knows that because Marina edited some of his collections for a magazine, which we had the honor of presenting also in Manhattan last night. It's called Vremena, and it's edited by David Guy. And I would say that Marina, who is with us today, she is the soul of that literary publication. She does so much for it, and she picks really amazing poetry, which otherwise wouldn't find itself to be published. Marina, thank you so much. Спасибо вам большое. So Pavel Ritzer and I are from the same house, really, in Kyiv, but we did not know that. He's a year younger than me. We both grew up in the same neighborhood in Kyiv, but we did not know each other. So Oleg Maximenko once brought him and his amazing and very talented poet wife, Irina Rybka, to one of our Ocean Bridge gatherings. And that's how we met. So dig, if you will, the picture, as Prince would say. We pretty much grew up on the same street, which is now the street named after John McCain in downtown Kyiv. And it's an intersection of John McCain and Pope, famous Polish Pope who was from Poland, the second, who would have told us in our Soviet childhood that that's possible. That's why I'm saying that nothing is impossible. So we grew up on this Kudry Street, which is now John McCain, but did not know each other, and met on the Ocean Bridge, me sitting in Chicago, him being in Kyiv a year before the war, through poetry. Him and then Tanga in Bucha. Let's see, where is Pavel? Just a second. I just had his poem right here. This is my book, by the way, Doloroso. Not to plug it in any way, but if you want to read more translations, it's also available on Amazon. And Marina did an amazing job editing this book. So Marina Berlander. It's called Doloroso, which is a musical movement which bespells sadness. And that is all while I'm still looking for Pavel's poem, and I will find it.
As you look for his poem, when you read Falkovich's poem, I think a lot of us who are regulars on the show responded very emotionally. Falkovich has a book called Rudy about the experience of the war from the perspective of a Jack Terrier, a dog, which is a kind of dovetails with your reading of the Orange Cat poem. Two very different outcomes, and yet there's some similarities there. And I see that Marina has her hand up. Marina, please go ahead and join the show.
Thank you. Well, I don't want to interrupt Gary. If he is ready to read, I will wait. I just wanted to, first of all, I wanted to thank him for all these nice words and kind words that he said in my address. But Gary, go ahead, please.
Well, it's not Gary. Marina,
I just didn't want to leave you, to leave you without my great gratitude.
No, Marina, you're an amazing friend, and it's an honor. So, but I did find Pasha's poem. We call him Pasha.
Okay, go ahead with Pasha. Go ahead with Pasha.
We call Pavel Pasha because he's such a darling of ours. And I'll tell you, after we just had a reading in Boston last weekend with Galina Itzkovich, with whom we also read in Manhattan last night. And I was on the way to the airport, and Pasha wrote to me from the front lines. We just came out from the raid. We have internet again, and I saw on Facebook that you and Galia were reading in Boston. Please tell Galia that all the volunteer stuff that she sent finally got to us on the front lines, and we are using it. Thank you very much. We're keeping warm with it because we just came out of the battle. So please thank Galia. And I'm like, I'm texting Galia. I'm like, can you imagine? I mean, the world is such an oyster. It's so small nowadays. So, Pavel Ritzel, the snow is black and grainy over the raven's exchange, as if in the title, granting grains coffee superior range, the cold which is swift and pinching, the sun is dark abyss, the negative nausea inching in line with the morning bliss. The marching will come to fruition, the cross would give it to that hill. You're so in my submission, in cold like darkness at will, you'll deal so nonchalantly with several doorknob locks, the air so moaningly darkly, salty and obvious thus, you would emerge so dirty, bending yourself on my will, the anti-birch flying sorties, rebel into gray-black grill. To you I have not been given, I'll utter to whispering bunch, my llama-like modesty when akin to the teeth and cold crunch, the warmth of that first embracing is like that burn of the lips, you'll cure the dark by light tracing, no matter how dense is the grease. We have about 2 minutes left of an official time that you guys allocated, and I would like to ask for your permission to read a poem by a colleague of mine, a great Kyiv volunteer, a translation of his, which kind of became famous with this whole Tanga in Bucha movement. Bucha is the suburb of Kyiv where our grandmas used to take us. It's beautiful, it's leafy, and we used to go there and look at the leaves in the fall, and then in the spring come back again and look into how those leaves are becoming alive again. And that is the symbolism that Bucha that saw the most tremendous and despicable atrocities of this war is coming alive. And the way it does is best described in poetry. Vlad Molodid is a lawyer. His name is spelled Molodid. He's a lawyer, and from the very day number one, even when the Russians were still in Bucha, they were being cleared out of there by the Ukrainian army after committing all these atrocities. He started going there and bringing supplies to the survivors, which were not many. So for Katerina and for the benefit of those who listen to us in Ukrainian, I will use the first couple of lines from that poem from Vlad's Molodid original in Ukrainian, and then read the translation and then express my gratitude for inviting me here. It was really a tremendous pleasure. Танго in Бучі, Влад Молодід. Я бачив танго в знеструмленій Бучі, у тому квітні, коли не до танцю, коли вечори холодні й тягучі, брудні й численні, як війни у шанці. Коли він спитав, а чого чекала, і як розрубати печалі ланцюг, сказала танго, під беле чао, в знеструмленій Бучі, коли не до танцю. I witnessed tango in Bucha, with power cut and out and shot, in that single April, which so wasn't fit for dances, when evenings are cold and are really wrenching your gut, dirty and numerous as wars and trenches are taking chances. I witnessed as he approached her and told her straight, I brought you all those things for Easter, what else is needed? She did not utter a sound. Not a word was said. She wanted no bread, and her need for the sky was seated. I saw as he asked about bringing her blanket covers, some water, a flashlight, mallow seeds, and other maybes. She just raised her eyebrow, as if only a fool discovers that it's worth coming back here with things being saviors. With her hand, she pointed back to the terrace, where two pesky domestic cats were hunting a mouse, and told him that with her body, without being embarrassed, she warms both of them at night in a cold and deserted house. And then, when he asked, is there something that makes you bow? How do you chase away that sadness in hopeless glances? She answered, tango, only that tango, with Bella Ciao, in Bucha, with lives being cut in that April, not really fit for dances. Thank you so much. I will start heading to the airport, but I will answer if there are some questions. We still have some time. I am tremendously grateful for an opportunity to be here today, even if a number 101, it's an honorable number to have. Dr. Fat, thank you so much.
Thank you,
And
Gary.
Katerina, thank you very much for co-hosting this and for all your amazing questions, especially on Babin Yar. It's a hole in my heart, really.
Thank you.
We thank you profoundly, and this was amazing list of the names and tributes and honors. I have heard many of them before, but you brought them beautifully in focus today as we head to another February and to 2 years of this terrible war. We bear witness, and you bear a lot of it, and we thank you.
Thank you so much. Glory to Ukraine, and all the best to Israel. Thank you so
Slava
much.
Ukraini, Am Chai Israel. Dr. Shrey, few words in Ukrainian, please.
Yeah, we paused just to remember one more time Maxim Krivtsov in the Ukrainian greeting or Ukrainian saying Vichna yemu pam'ять. And then our closing, Дорогі браття і сестри в Україні, ми зберігаємо вас у наших щоденних думках і молитвах. Нехай милосердний Бог тримає вас у своїй опіці. До наступного тижня. Прощаємося.
Героям слава! Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
Героям слава!
Дякую вам.
Safe travels.